Hey there, I'm Tyler and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to build all of this cabinetry to make this laundry room an epic usable space. Like so many of my projects recently, this project involved a lot of plywood. I think it was 11, might have been 13 sheets of 3/4 inch maple plywood to complete this project. I am using plywood from Timber Products. I started out by breaking down as much as I possibly could on the table saw. Once I had broken down as much as I could on the table saw, it was time to cross-cut those pieces down to more manageable lengths. For the boards that were too long to safely cross-cut on the table saw and too wide to flip on the miter saw, I used my DIY track guides to cross-cut them using a cordless circular saw. I actually recently made a video on making these DIY tracks. You can find a link to that down in the description below or up in the top right-hand corner of your screen. A good practice that I always like to keep is to keep track of the parts that I have cut by marking them off on my plans. A very good idea when you have a lot of pieces like with this build. After that, I have moved over to my miter saw where I flip boards over when needed to make the larger crosscuts. This is easily repeatable when you have an accurate miter stop. Once everything was cross-cut, it was time for a lot of pocket holes. This video has been brought to us today by Craig Tool, a bunch of whose tools you'll see me use in today's video. The latest addition to the shop is the Craig Jig Foreman, and this saved me an incredible amount of time with all the cabinets that I've been building recently. I do have another Craig Jig pocket hole jig behind me, and this little guy right here, which is actually the first tool that I ever purchased when I started my woodworking journey. Still use it to this day in various different capacities, and this shoulder bit is actually the original one that came with this kit, and it has lasted me to this day. Be sure to check Craig out at craigjig.com and take a look over there because they might have a new tool that is pretty awesome. 33 parts, 4 holes each, took me about 9 minutes with the Foreman. Probably would have taken me an hour with my older jig. After all of the components had their various different pocket holes, it was time for one of my favorite tasks in the shop, edge banding. I don't really know why I like edge banding so much. It's a little bit weird. It may be the fact that you can turn a rough looking piece of plywood into a beautiful solid looking piece of wood, but I also am not sure if it's the fact that it's quieter in the shop and I can focus on my audiobook a little bit more without sacrificing any safety. Regardless, edge banding is a simple task with very few tools required, and it really adds a fantastic look to your completed project. Before moving on to any assembly, I needed to add a toe kick to the base frame cabinets. I did this over on the bandsaw using a stop block while running the boards up against my fence. And now moving on to the assembly of all the different various frames. I did pay attention to the clarity of the grain on the cabinets, as I wanted that facing inside the cabinet, as the outer edges will be butt up against each other and you will never see them again. I wanted it to be a clear, beautiful look when you open up the cabinets and look inside. The frame assembly was made very simple using various different Craig Tool clamps. This one that you see right here is actually a new angle clamp, and by golly, whoever came up with that design needs a raise. It's absolutely fantastic and super easy to use. Once I got the basic frame assembled, I removed the clamps and flipped the entire thing over so that the face was down. And this is so that I can add some supports at the top and bottom, which will allow me to mount the cabinet to the wall, and it just shores up the whole thing so there is no wobble. Some of you might be wondering why I chose to go with pocket holes, which will be visible on the underside of these cabinets, versus just a butt joint wood glue and brad nails, which wouldn't be visible. It's a simple fact that in my humble opinion, the pocket screws result in a stronger bond than the brad nails. For the finish on these cabinets, I am going to be using Sherwin-Williams Sheerwood Chem Aqua Plus. I'll be putting down 2 coats of surfacer, which is their version of the primer, and then we'll be putting on 2 coats of top coats, this time in a color of Dover White. I'm actually going to be using a Fuji Spray Systems pressure pot, which is a fantastic addition to your shop if you ever do a large quantity of cabinets or doors like I've been doing recently. It allows you to fill your pot less, and right here is the big kicker: you can flip your gun in any direction and never have any air hiccups in your spray pattern. Hey, look at that, there's a bunch of doors, and I didn't show that at all because I have recently put out a video that shows my process of making these shaker style doors. You can find that link in the description below or in the top right corner of your screen. Right here I'm showing the process between the primer coats and the top coats of the finish. And that process is to do a quick sand with 220 grit and use a sanding block to get those finicky inside corners, and then clean it up with a tack cloth. Once that is done, it is out into the quote-unquote spray booth again to put the coats of top coat on. And just like every single other shelf project I've ever done in my life, I forgot to put the shelf pin holes in before moving the project into the house. So I will add those right now, accommodating for 2 shelves in each upper frame using the Craig Tool shelf pin jig. And now it is time to install all our frames. And hey, you might notice this didn't make it into the video either. This is a stacking laundry room basket shelf, and I thought it was interesting enough and a unique enough concept that we will have a separate video for that in the next few weeks. I installed that first shelf nice and square and level, making sure I had a good reference point, and then measured from there to where my studs will be and pre-drilled those holes so that I can quickly and easily lift the frame into place and mount it permanently using some 2.5-inch wood screws. And then repeated that process again and again until I had all of the upper frames installed.
Are those 2 cabinets?
What do you think?
Why are you up there?
Pretty awesome, huh?
Yeah.
The wall did seem to bow away a little bit on this far corner, so I used some shims to make sure the front of the cabinets were perfectly aligned. And moving down to the lower frames, it was much the same, making sure that first one was perfectly level, and then moving on from there, getting all of them permanently mounted against the walls. We did have one giant cabinet, which is acting as a broom closet in this laundry room, and I never realized how close this was actually going to be to the ceiling when rotating it into place. And we are adding a frame to go around the washing machines with the countertop over the top. Thankfully, we remembered to cut a hole in the side of the cabinet, which is going to be underneath the sink, so that we could quickly access the gas line if we need to. And for the counters in this laundry room, we are going to be using Wilson Art laminate, and for the substrate for that, we will use 3/4-inch particle board. For the portion over the washing machines, I'm doubling it up to prevent any bowing over time. This is what I'm going to love.
All the Monday teachers are going to still because they already had it take off. Nobody does.
Cut and fit the rest of the substrate into place and fastened it to the frames from the bottom using 1 1/4-inch pocket screws. And a second strip was glued and brad nailed into place on the tongue of the cabinet to add that extra thickness that you typically see with laminate countertops. I am breezing over the installation of this laminate countertop as I have done one on this channel before. There will be a link to that video in the description down below and in the top right hand corner of your screen. We will be adding a stainless steel drop-in sink to this epic laundry room build, so here I'm using the provided template so that I can squarely cut out the portion that is not needed. I first drilled a pilot hole and then cut that portion out using my jigsaw. And a big shout out to my helpers. This is my son who is helping clean up, and obviously my younger brother who helped me come in and set the countertop and the lower cabinets on that long day of work. now for adding the actual laminate itself. We are using an HD pattern laminate from Wilson Art, and I'm also using Wilson Art's water-based contact cement. I know a lot of people might not be fans that it's a water-based contact cement, but it doesn't stink at all, and you can do it all indoors and not have to evacuate the house. Once we had got all the surface permanently glued into place, I used a flush trim bit on my cordless router to flush up the edges before adding the decorative nose edging. The typical process for this is to glue the edging into place first and then trim route over the top of it, but because we're using the decorative bull nose edging, you can't flush trim it, so you gotta flush trim first and then glue the edging into place. Again, if you're looking for more details on how to install laminate counter, check out the video in the description below. And then adding that stainless steel drop-in sink. Added some caulk and shoved the sink into place. Back to those magic doors. Again, if you want to see a video on how I made these doors, check out the link in the description below or in the top right hand corner of your screen. Here I am adding the recess holes for the Euro soft close hinges that we will be using, and I'm using a Euro hinge jig from Kreg Tool to accurately and repeatably drill those holes. Now this is my preferred way of installing these Euro hinges. I put the hinges into place, use a long ruler to make sure both of the hinges are parallel to each other, and then drill and screw them into place. So that is one way, and that's my preferred method, but the Kreg Tool hinge jig has the pilot holes already marked out on the jig itself. So you can drill your large recess hole, unhook the jig and move your bigger drill away and come in with another drill to drill the pilot holes right here. Then, when you remove the entire jig and place the hinge into place, look at that, you got two perfectly placed holes ready to go. To mount the second portion of the hinge mechanism on the cabinet frames, I used a little jig that I made myself to do repeatable holes and a spacer, which is the space around the cabinet door to space the jig away correctly, and then drilled the pilot holes and added the second portion of the hinges into place. Quickly pop the doors onto their mounting plates, and it is remarkable how much adjustment is in these hinges to get the perfect placement of your inset doors in your cabinet frames. And lastly, it is time to add some beautiful satin nickel hardware to these cabinets. Using this jig from Kreg Tool, the hardware jig, I'm able to repeatably put the handles in place and the knobs for the upper cabinets. And for the reveal, just look at that, isn't it awesome? It came out pretty good. There's definitely things that I can improve on in the future, but that is life. I definitely know that with inset cabinet doors, of which this is my first time, you definitely have to be very, very careful and be perfectly square when building your frames. Hey guys, don't tell anybody, but I think I might be done with this project. Finally, this was a long project, a big project, and a lot of different aspects went into getting this thing complete, but we are super happy with how it turned out, and it is definitely a beautiful, epic, functional space. I hope you guys enjoyed it and that you learned something from this video that you can take from here and do some improvement in your own home. If you did enjoy this video, please hammer that thumbs up button. Helps us out a ton and gets this video in front of more eyes. If you're new here, be sure to hit that red subscribe button down there and ring that bell so you never miss when we upload a new video. I'm DIY Tyler. and you guys have a good one. Let's go sit here and look at it for a minute because it's pretty nice.